Imagine it's 480 BC. The largest invasion force the world has ever seen is marching toward a narrow mountain pass, where a few hundred warriors stand ready to defend everything they love. Behind them lie their homes, their families, and their freedom. Ahead stretches a sea of enemy soldiers so vast that, as the legends say, their arrows will blot out the sun. They know they're outnumbered. They know no reinforcements are coming. Yet they stand their ground, shields locked, spears ready, determined to carve their names into history. This is the story of the 300 Spartans and their allies, who defied impossible odds and forever changed the course of Western civilization. Before we dive into this epic tale of courage and sacrifice, don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell, because trust me, you won't want to miss our deep dives into the moments that shaped history. Now, let's travel back to ancient Greece, to a time when the clash of empires would define the destiny of an entire world. The Battle of Thermopylae isn't just a story from the past. It's a timeless legend of bravery that's echoed across 25 centuries. But beyond the legend and beyond the Hollywood portrayals lies a far deeper truth. This wasn't just about 300 warriors making a last stand. It was a collision of two worlds. The unstoppable rise of Persian imperial power meeting the fierce independence of the Greek city-states. It was a high-stakes gamble, one that would either safeguard the birthplace of democracy or see it wiped from existence. And at its heart, it was about ordinary men who chose to do something extraordinary when everything they valued was on the line. To understand what truly happened at those hot gates, we need to step back and look at the world that created this moment, the forces that set these armies on a collision course, and the leaders who would shape one of history's most unforgettable battles. Because this isn't just a war story, it's the story of how determination and unity can alter the destiny of nations. Our journey doesn't begin at Thermopylae. It begins a decade earlier, on the plains of Marathon. In 490 BC, the Persian king Darius I sent an invasion to punish Greece, certain that his vast empire would crush the divided city-states. Instead, the Persians met a shocking defeat. Outnumbered but relentless, Athenian soldiers charged with the fury of men defending their homeland and routed the mighty Persian army. When the dust settled, Persian troops fled in chaos, abandoning their weapons and their pride. For Darius, it wasn't just a loss, it was a humiliation. The greatest empire on earth had been humbled by a handful of Greek farmers and merchants turned soldiers. That sting of defeat would haunt him until his death. And when he passed, his dream of vengeance didn't die with him. It burned even brighter in the heart of his son, a ruler whose ambitions would make his father's seem small by comparison. Xerxes wasn't satisfied with simply avenging his father's defeat. Where Darius had sought punishment, Xerxes dreamed of total conquest. He saw himself as divinely appointed, a living god destined to rule the entire known world. Greece wouldn't just be punished, it would be swallowed by his empire. For 4 years, he assembled what ancient sources call the largest army ever gathered. From India to Egypt, from the steppes of Central Asia to the Black Sea, soldiers poured in. Numbers are debated, but even conservative estimates suggest a land force of 70,000 to 300,000 men, backed by over 1,200 warships. The logistics were staggering, but Xerxes met them with the limitless resources of Persia. He dug a canal through the Athos Peninsula to give his fleet safer passage. More audaciously, he built a bridge of ships across the Hellespont Strait, a temporary bridge over a mile long, to march his army directly from Asia into Europe. When the first bridge was destroyed by storms, Xerxes' response revealed his character. He ordered the sea itself to be whipped 300 times and executed the engineers responsible. This wasn't the measured reaction of a commander. It was the fury of a man who believed he was divine, convinced that even nature must obey him. The second bridge held. In 480 BC, the colossal army began its march. Ancient sources describe 7 days and 7 nights of crossing, with soldiers, cavalry, supply trains, and camp followers moving in an endless display of imperial might. Meanwhile, the Greeks faced a grim reality. Many northern city-states had already surrendered, seeing resistance as hopeless. The scattered cities now faced a choice: surrender their independence, or unite to defend their freedom. Leadership naturally fell to Sparta, the Greek state universally recognized as a military powerhouse. But Sparta was more than a strong army. It was a society forged entirely around war. While other city-states pursued trade, art, and politics, Sparta devoted itself to one goal: creating the most formidable soldiers in the world. Their social system, the Agoge, was designed to produce warriors above all else. The Spartan way of life began before birth. At birth, elders inspected infants, and any deemed weak or flawed were abandoned on the hillsides. Only the strongest survived to continue the Spartan line. For those who survived, childhood was no refuge. At age 7, boys were taken from their families and entered the Agoge, a state-controlled training program that would dominate the next decade. They learned basic literacy, but the true lessons were survival, discipline, physical conditioning, and relentless military training. A system designed to produce warriors capable of facing the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. Spartan boys lived in communal barracks and were deliberately kept hungry to teach resourcefulness. They were expected to steal food, but if caught, the punishment wasn't for stealing, it was for being careless. Every lesson was designed to strip away weakness, forge discipline, and create men who would obey without question and endure any hardship without complaint. They learned to operate as a unit, to trust their fellow soldiers implicitly, and to see death in battle as preferable to retreat. Courage wasn't just admired, it was the highest virtue. Cowardice carried a social death far worse than the battlefield, as fleeing Spartans were shunned by family, friends, and community. Even Spartan women were part of this warrior culture. Unlike women elsewhere in Greece, they were educated and physically trained, with one duty above all: to raise strong sons for the state. Mothers famously told their children, "Return from battle with your shield or on it." To a Spartan, abandoning your shield meant abandoning honor. This simple phrase reinforced the relentless commitment to bravery. This brutal system produced King Leonidas and his 300 royal bodyguards, men forged in the harsh crucible of Spartan society, embodying every ideal the state prized. As Xerxes' vast army advanced through Greece, the Greek alliance faced an overwhelming challenge. How could a small force stop an enemy that outnumbered them by tens or even hundreds to one? The answer came from Themistocles, the Athenian general who had masterminded the victory at Marathon. Themistocles proposed a coordinated land and sea strategy that turned geography into a weapon. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: force the Persians to attack through a narrow mountain pass, where their numbers counted for nothing, while simultaneously blocking their navy in confined waters. The land chosen for the battle was Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, named for the sulfur springs bubbling up from the ground. In 480 BC, this coastal pass was extraordinarily narrow, squeezed between steep mountains on one side and the sea on the other. At its tightest point, it was barely 100 meters wide, just enough for a few dozen soldiers to stand shoulder to shoulder. This choice was a stroke of strategic genius. The narrow pass acted as a force multiplier for the Greeks, nullifying the Persians' overwhelming numbers. No matter how many troops Xerxes sent, only a fraction could engage at a time. And with the Greeks fighting in their disciplined phalanx formation, They could hold the line on nearly equal terms, setting the stage for one of history's most legendary standoffs. Their position at Thermopylae would force the Persians into exactly the fight the Greeks wanted. The enemy would have to attack uphill, through a narrow gap, against a prepared defensive line held by the most elite infantry in the world. Greek advantages in training, equipment, and discipline would be fully amplified. But there was a problem that could have derailed the entire plan. The Persian invasion came during two of the most sacred events in the Greek calendar: the Olympic Games and Sparta's own Carnea festival. Spartan law forbade any military action during the Carnea. It was considered a duty to the gods that even threats to the state could not override. Faced with this impossible choice, the Spartan council devised a compromise. They couldn't send the full army, but they allowed King Leonidas to march north immediately with his personal bodyguard of 300 men. These weren't just any soldiers. They were the elite of the elite, veterans personally selected by Leonidas. Herodotus notes a chilling detail. Leonidas chose men who already had sons, ensuring that their families and the Spartan line would continue even if they did not return. Before leaving Sparta, Leonidas undertook a pilgrimage that became part of the legend. He visited Delphi to consult the oracle, Greece's most revered spiritual authority. The prophecy he received was both terrifying and cryptic. Either Sparta itself would fall, or a Spartan king of royal blood would have to die to save the city. For Leonidas, there was no real choice. Duty to the state outweighed all else. He accepted the burden, knowing that his death might be the price of his people's survival. As he marched north, Leonidas gathered additional allies. By the time the Greek force reached Thermopylae, it numbered around 7,000, a tiny army by ancient standards, yet formidable for a delaying action. Spartans, Thespians, Thebans, and soldiers from other city-states took their place in the narrow pass. The Greeks immediately began preparing their defenses. They rebuilt and reinforced the ancient Phocian wall, which blocked the narrowest part of the pass. Behind it, they positioned their men in the feared phalanx formation. To grasp what came next, it's important to understand why the Greek phalanx was so devastating. A hoplite warrior was essentially a walking fortress. Bronze armor protected chest and legs, topped with the iconic Corinthian helmet covering the head. Each soldier carried a long spear, the doru for thrusting, and a short sword for close combat. But the most critical piece was the hoplon, a massive round shield of wood and bronze, protecting him from neck to knee and linking with his comrades to form an unbreakable wall of defense. When hoplites formed for battle, they stood shoulder to shoulder, their shields overlapping to create a near-impenetrable bronze wall. The front ranks pointed their long spears forward, forming a deadly forest of spear points that could stop any charge. In the narrow confines of Thermopylae, this formation would be nearly unbreakable. No matter how many Persians attacked, only a few could engage at once, rendering their numerical advantage meaningless. When Xerxes' massive army finally reached the pass, the sight must have been terrifying. Ancient sources describe troops stretching to the horizon, banners fluttering, weapons glinting in the sun. Xerxes set up his command post on a nearby hill, confident that sheer intimidation would make the Greeks flee. But for 4 days, nothing happened. Xerxes couldn't believe this tiny force dared to defy him. He sent messengers demanding surrender, and the Greeks answered with some of history's most legendary replies. When warned that Persian archers would blot out the sun, a Spartan supposedly replied, "Good, then we will fight in the shade." During this pause, the Greeks made final preparations. They drilled, checked their equipment, and performed traditional pre-battle rituals. Spartan warriors combed their long hair, honoring the customs they followed before battles they expected might be their last. On the 5th day, Xerxes' patience broke. he ordered his archers to unleash a massive volley. Thousands of the finest Persian archers fired simultaneously, and the sky darkened with arrows, just as the Greeks had been warned. But the Greeks were ready. They lifted their heavy bronze shields, overlapping them to form a deflective shell. The arrow storm fell harmlessly, clattering off bronze with contemptuous ease. When the barrage ended, the Greek line stood firm, calm and unbroken, ready for the real fight. Frustrated, Xerxes sent in his first wave of infantry, 10,000 Medes and Sagai, tasked with capturing the Greeks alive. What followed was a brutal demonstration of discipline, training, and equipment superiority. The Persian soldiers charged with courage, but they were doomed. Their weapons, short spears, and lighter shields were built for open battlefields, not the tight, phalanx-filled pass. Their attacks failed utterly. Persian spears couldn't reach the Greeks. Their wicker and leather shields shattered against bronze, and their swords could not pierce Greek armor. Frontline soldiers fell, trampled by those behind them, chaos spreading through the ranks. Meanwhile, the Greeks fought with relentless precision. Trained for years in these formations, they rotated fresh men to the front, maintaining constant pressure. The narrow pass amplified their strengths, turning the battlefield into a killing ground. By the end of the first day, thousands of Persian soldiers lay dead, while Greek losses were minimal. Xerxes had thrown a massive army against a tiny force and watched it shatter like waves on rocks. For the Persian king, this defiance was incomprehensible. In his world, overwhelming numbers and force always won. The idea that a handful of Greeks could hold the line was beyond belief. Xerxes still had one final card, his elite personal guard, the Immortals. 10,000 hand-picked warriors, drawn from the nobility of the empire. They were called Immortals, because each loss, whether in battle or from illness, was immediately replaced, preserving the illusion of an unbreakable, undying force. These were seasoned, heavily armed soldiers, equipped with scale armor and superior weapons, battle-hardened across countless campaigns. Xerxes believed that where his regular troops had failed, the Immortals would surely succeed. But the narrow pass stripped them of every advantage. No matter their skill or training, the Immortals could not break the Greek shield wall. On the second day, the Greeks unveiled one of their most effective tactics, the feigned retreat. The phalanx would appear to falter and flee, luring the Persians into abandoning their formation. Then, at the perfect moment, the Greeks would pivot, reform their shield wall in seconds, and annihilate the overextended enemy. This maneuver demanded perfect discipline, exactly what the phalanx system trained for. Persian soldiers, fighting as individuals rather than as a unit, fell for it repeatedly. Ancient sources even claim that Xerxes leapt from his throne 3 times in horror as his finest soldiers were cut down. The pass became a slaughterhouse, yet the Greek line remained unbroken. By the end of the second day, Persian morale was cracking. They had thrown everything at 7,000 Greeks and gained nothing but horrific losses. Rumors spread through the camp. These men were not mortal. They could not be defeated. Leonidas' strategy was flawless. Every hour the Greeks held Thermopylae bought precious time for the rest of Greece to prepare. But the tide was about to turn. As the Greeks rested after 2 days of stunning success, a traitor emerged. Ephialtes, a local Greek familiar with every path and trail around Thermopylae, approached Xerxes with a secret. For Persian gold, he revealed the Anapai path, a narrow, winding trail through the mountains behind the Greek position. With this route, the Persians could bypass the main pass entirely and strike Leonidas from the rear. The irony was bitter. The Greeks were betrayed not by a Persian spy, but by one of their own countrymen. a name that would echo through history as a symbol of treachery. Xerxes immediately understood the significance. He ordered his general Hydarnes to lead the immortals along the Anape path under cover of darkness. If they could reach the rear of the Greek line by dawn, they would crush the defenders in a devastating pincer attack. Through the night, the Persian force navigated the treacherous mountain trail. Narrow, steep, and perilous, the path would have challenged anyone, even in daylight. But the promise of finally breaking the stalemate drove them forward. Yet Leonidas was not unprepared. The Spartan king had anticipated the possibility of a flanking maneuver. He stationed 1,000 Phocian soldiers on the mountain to guard the Anapai path, ready to counter any attempt to encircle his men. At dawn on the third day, the advancing Persians stumbled upon the Phocian guards. The first warning came from the rustle of leaves as the enemy moved through the underbrush. After a brief exchange of arrows, the Phocians made a catastrophic error. They assumed they were the main target and retreated up the mountain, preparing for what they believed would be their last stand. But the Persians ignored them. Their true objective was behind Leonidas, to trap the main Greek force in the pass. By the time a messenger reached Leonidas with the news, it was too late. The Persian force was already in position behind the Greeks. The trap was closing, and escape was impossible. Leonidas immediately convened a council of war. The situation was dire. Surrounded front and rear, the Greek army faced near certain annihilation. Most allied commanders argued for retreat. They had held the pass for 3 days and inflicted massive casualties, enough to justify withdrawal and preserve their forces for future battles. Leonidas agreed. He ordered the bulk of the Greek army to retreat while the route was still open. This was not defeat. It was sound military strategy. The delaying action had succeeded, buying time for the rest of Greece to prepare. But Leonidas himself would not leave. Bound by the Spartan code, the oracle's prophecy, and his own sense of duty, he and his 300 Spartans stayed to fight to the death, covering the allies' escape. They were not entirely alone. In an extraordinary act of heroism, 700 Thespians, led by Thermopylae, voluntarily chose to stay and die alongside the Spartans. This selfless decision ensured that their sacrifice would be remembered alongside Leonidas's men. 400 Thebans remained as well, though sources suggest some may have been compelled, and a few surrendered during the final battle. Knowing the end was near, Leonidas reportedly told his men to eat a hearty breakfast. They would dine that evening in the underworld. Practical, unflinching, and tinged with dark humor, it was a perfectly Spartan response to imminent death. When the final Persian assault began, the Greeks did not wait behind the wall. They advanced into the wider part of the pass, determined to kill as many enemies as possible before being overwhelmed. What followed was pure, desperate violence, a close-quarters melee that would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. The remaining Greeks fought with a fury born of desperation. Spears shattered, swords broke, and when weapons failed, they fought with daggers, rocks, even their bare hands. Leonidas fell in the heart of battle, and both sides struggled over his body. The Greeks recovered their king, but at immense cost. Eventually, the sheer weight of numbers became insurmountable. Survivors were pushed to a small hill within the pass, surrounded on all sides. They made their final stand, and were finally overwhelmed by a storm of Persian arrows. By day's end, nearly every Spartan and Thespian was dead. The hot gates had fallen, and the road to southern Greece lay open. On the surface, Thermopylae was a Persian victory. The Greek force had been annihilated, the pass was taken, and Xerxes' army resumed its march south. In a final act of rage, he ordered Leonidas's body decapitated and crucified, a barbaric gesture, even by the standards of ancient warfare. But the cost of victory for Xerxes was staggering. Conservative estimates suggest the Persians lost between 20,000 and 30,000 men, roughly a quarter of their army in just 3 days. More importantly, they had lost something far less tangible, the aura of invincibility that had made Persian conquest seem inevitable. The 3-day delay gave the rest of Greece crucial time to prepare for the next phase of the war. Greek naval forces were moving into position for the decisive battle to come. Weeks after Thermopylae, the Persian and Greek fleets clashed in the narrow straits near Salamis. Themistocles, the strategic genius behind Thermopylae, had drawn the larger Persian navy into confined waters, neutralizing their numerical advantage, the same principle the Greeks had used at the Hot Gates. The result was a devastating defeat for Persia. Motivated by the heroism they had witnessed at Thermopylae and fighting in waters they knew intimately, the Greeks shattered Xerxes' fleet in a single day. Cut off from supplies and reinforcements, the Persian land army became a logistical nightmare. Xerxes retreated with the bulk of his forces, leaving only a reduced army, which would later be crushed at Plataea by a unified Greek force inspired by the memory of Leonidas and his men. Greek independence was secured for generations. Thermopylae's significance went far beyond tactics or military outcomes. The battle became a legend almost immediately, transforming into a symbol that transcended city-state rivalries. For the Greeks, it represented a shared identity and common cause. The sacrifice of the 300 and their Thespian allies was a rallying cry that united Greece and proved that even the greatest empire could be resisted. The psychological impact was immense. Ordinary men, fighting for freedom, had stood against the world's mightiest army. Their courage inspired wavering cities to join the fight, stiffened resistance, and changed the course of history. Monuments commemorated the fallen, including a stone lion for Leonidas. Simonides immortalized their sacrifice in one of history's most famous epitaphs. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Thermopylae did not just inspire ancient Greece. For over 2 millennia, the story of the 300 has been retold across cultures, inspiring soldiers, leaders, and ordinary people to acts of extraordinary courage. Literature, art, and even modern films capture its essential truth. Some principles are worth dying for, and small groups of determined individuals can indeed change the world. The 300 did not win in the conventional sense, but they achieved something far greater. They proved that certain defeats can become more powerful than victories. Their sacrifice bought time, preserved Greek freedom, and showed that tyranny, even the most formidable, cannot crush the human spirit. Thermopylae remains remarkably relevant. It reminds us that freedom isn't free, that some causes are worth standing for regardless of the odds, and that ordinary people, when called upon, are capable of extraordinary heroism. The battle ended in annihilation for Leonidas and his men, but their story had just begun. In dying at the Hot Gates, they created a legend that has inspired humanity for over 2,000 years. We are all, in a very real sense, inheritors of what those 300 men died for. The lesson of Thermopylae is not to seek glorious death. It's that when everything we value is at stake, ordinary people have the power to make extraordinary choices. Small actions, taken with courage, can echo through eternity and change the course of history. If this video gave you a new appreciation for one of history's most legendary battles, make sure to like it and share it with anyone who loves stories of courage against impossible odds. History isn't just dates and names. It's the human drama that has shaped our world and continues to inspire us today.